This tutorial is on the high-level interface of GameMaker, so consider this the Getting Started tutorial. For anything you'd want to do in GameMaker, you can usually access through this File menu, the toolbar, or this side panel here. So if you wanted to create any entity or whatnot, you can use this Resources menu, or you can use this toolbar for visual representation of what you'd like to do. Or you can use this side panel. I tend to prefer the side panel. I don't really use any of the other options. So I'm just going to go through this side panel. And everything you can do, you just right-click the folder of your choosing and choose Create Sprite, for example, if you want to create something visual. You can use Add Existing, but I just tend to do Create and say Load if I want to add existing. So let me go back into that sprite. So sprite is a visual depiction of anything in the game world. For example, Mario. Animated Mario is just a bunch of individual, what are called cells, basically cards that will flip through like a flip book. But you need all those art assets stored as sprites. And then you change different properties of the sprites in this menu. For sounds, if you want to add sounds, it's through there. Backgrounds are kind of self-explanatory. They're a background in your game, like the sky in Mario, the ground, whatnot. Anything that doesn't really change, kind of just moves with the character, doesn't have any properties or anything, that would be a background. Paths are self-explanatory as well. They're defined paths that any entity in the game will take. For example, Goombas walking back and forth could just be a line, and you tell them to start at one end, and once they get to the end, they go back. They just keep staying on that line. With Galaga, as another example, ships can fly in on curves that spin at the bottom. That would be done with a path. That'd probably be the best way to do it, the simplest. You just define a curved path, and they'll follow it. Scripts, if you want to reuse code, you can define them as scripts and just call them from objects. I tend to just do everything within each object. That simplifies things for me at least, but some people prefer scripts. With fonts, the next entity, if you're making a game that uses a system font that isn't found on anybody else's computer, for example, if you wanted to use the Pac-Man font, people are generally not going to have that on their computer, so it's not going to render correctly. It'll default to something like Arial or Times New Roman. So you have to embed special fonts into the game. So you would do that by downloading the font and then creating a font through this menu. Timelines are useful for things that happen on a consistent basis that need sort of separate properties based on what time it is in the game. I tend to stay away from these. I've never actually used timelines. I don't really recommend them. But if you think you might, if you think that might sound useful, then maybe it would be useful for your game in particular. But you might want to come to us to see if there's a better way to do it. Objects are anything that has changing properties or is interactive in any way. That would be an object. For example, Mario, there's the animated Mario sprite, which is the visual, but if you want to tie that to something that moves around with input, jumps, turns left and right, you need to make that an object, and you set the sprite to that object. Objects don't necessarily have to be visual, though. For example, I like to have something called a controller that keeps track of health, or how many points I have, or how many lives I have left, and that's something invisible that's just persistent in the game. Room is kind of a defined area that does certain things. The simplest analogy for this would be a level, and that's kind of how they're used. In Asteroids, the game is pretty much an endless level, so you really only have one room, maybe two if you want the menu to be separate. Mario, the different worlds would be rooms, and in Zelda it would be a little bit different because the overworld is kind of too large and things would get out of hand, so it's good to break up sections as rooms. So like a dungeon section would be a room, one square area where Link does certain actions would be a room, and you just move between rooms when you get to the edge of the screen. Extensions, you probably won't use these either, but some have found some useful extensions in the past, so it's worth Googling. These are just things not included in GameMaker. The only example I can think of offhand is file dialog. If you wanted to be able to open a file in the game world, but you probably won't be doing that. Game information. If you just want to input stuff about your game, you would put it in here. The font's super tiny, so that's not going to be visible. But you would put stuff in here like help about the game, anything you wanted in plain text accessed through the game. And global game settings is stuff like changing the icon, behavior when the game loads, like is it full screen, just various things like that. But yeah, that's basically the high-level interface for the game. Check out the other videos, and I'll go more in depth. So thanks for watching.